Welcome to tonight's story, which is about the bacterium and the brain. And we'll start our story way, way, way back in time. Some 4 billion years. And planet Earth already existed at that time. But it looked quite different from the way it looks now. There were no trees, no plants, no animals, no humans, of course. There was no oxygen. But there was water, and hence there was life. And at that time, life on Earth looked like this. There were bacteria. And for many billions of years, our planet was inhabited only by bacteria. And they could inhabit all types of resorts. For example, there were bacteria living in the deep seas that formed these black smokers. And others resided close to lakes where they formed these large plaques. And I'll tell you a bit about the bacteria. You can picture it as a small chemical factory. And typically, one bacterium is specialized to eat substance A and digest it into substance B. And it usually collaborates with another bacterium that really likes substance B and can turn it into substance C, etc., etc., etc. So bacteria tend to live together in societies, much like we do. And as there are many million different bacteria, there's almost no organic substance that cannot be digested by a bacteria or can be produced by a bacteria. And it took at least 2 billion years before the first multicellular organism developed. And from there, yeasts and fungi developed, later plants and animals, finally mammals, and also humans. And we changed the planet quite a bit. It now looks like this, and that may give you the impression that this has been a human planet all along, but it's clearly not. And we are very, very recent guests on a planet that has always been inhabited by bacteria, which means that all current species have evolved together with bacteria. We need them, and they need us. And our bodies, as the bodies of other animals, as the bodies of plants, are full of bacteria. Have a look at the human body. There's bacteria on our skin, bacteria in our mouth, in our nose, our ears, quite a few on our sexual organs, some on our nipples. But most bacteria reside in our guts. And picture your gut as a warm, humid place, dark, shielded from sunlight, which is toxic for bacteria. And there's fresh food coming in all the time. It's nice and humid. It's the perfect place for bacteria. And adult humans typically carry around some 2 to 3 ounces of dry weight of bacteria. But it's not only bacteria that we carry in our guts, there's a whole jungle down here containing viruses that mainly infect those bacteria, fungi, yeasts, and an occasional parasite, which is perhaps not always a bad thing. This jungle that we carry in our guts is what we call the gut microbiome. And we've only recently begun to understand a little bit about what's happening there, because using DNA techniques, we can now read who's living in our gut. But we're not born with a complete microbiome. And actually, babies in the womb are virtually free of any bacteria. But their mom is not. And pregnant mothers carry a lot of lactic acid bacteria in their vagina. And these lactic acid bacteria is exactly the type that the baby needs to start a healthy microbiome. So by ways of vaginal birth, the baby is really rubbed in with these lactic acid bacteria. They get it in the mouth, in all parts of the body. It's swallowed, and that will be the start of its microbiome. And it will take some 3 years until it has developed a more or less mature microbiome. Now, with breast milk, these bacteria in the gut are again stimulated, because mother's milk not only feeds the baby, but it also feeds the lactic acid bacteria. If we look at a sugar molecule that you see here that's present in human breast milk, the first part of it can only be digested by the bacteria, and only afterwards the child can digest the rest of the milk. Now, why do mothers make it that difficult? Why do they make specific molecules to feed the bacteria as well? Well, this signifies that bacteria for the newborn baby are really important. It's really important to have adequate amounts of the right bacteria in your gut as soon as possible. Because the human brain at birth is very immature. If you look at foals or calves, they typically stand up within the hour. And they walk or even run at the first day. Not so much with human infants. In the first year, they're really quite helpless. And that reflects their completely immature brain. And the first 3 years are really needed to get everything working in the human brain. So the period of rapid maturation of the brain completely coincides with the period of microbiome development. And we know from rodent experiments with mice and rats that adequate development of the microbiome is crucial for adequate brain maturation. What we do in Groningen and in several places around the world is that we grow rats and mice under sterile conditions. So these little rodents are born by cesarean section under sterile conditions, and they're raised with sterile food, sterile water. They will not be touched by any bacteria. They will not develop a gut microbiome. And their brain will develop a bit deviant. Specific maturational aspects will lack, and their behavior will be slightly different. How different is that? For example, some animals are very anxious, or other animals raised under sterile conditions are not anxious enough. And most of them are less social. They do not communicate that much with other animals. They're quite impulsive. They cannot inhibit their first response. And they also have difficulties learning. As a psychiatrist, I'm not specialized in mice, but I do know these traits. And actually, many people have to cope with these traits, as they are common in people with ADHD or autism. And if we turn to humans, we don't raise humans under sterile conditions, but there are specific clinical conditions when the babies have a disadvantage in their development of the microbiome. Now, what happens if the development of the microbiome, human babies, lag behind? And that's, for example, the case in babies born with a cesarean section that did not travel through the vagina and were not rubbed in with lactic acid bacteria, and those that could not be fed by human breast milk, or those that needed to be treated with antibiotics at a very early age. And unfortunately, these three risk factors often co-occur in the same babies, namely in those born very early. In these babies, we see at adult age that there's a higher risk for allergies. Several allergies, food allergies, but also hay fever, asthma, and also for autoimmune disorders. These babies at adult age have a higher risk for obesity. They are more often overweight. They more often develop metabolic syndrome and diabetes. And also, regarding mental health, they more often have traits like autism or ADHD. So these are all traits that are very typical for modern Western society, that we see more frequent in what we call developed countries. And it could have to do with the more frequent lack of adequate microbiome development. Now, not only at young age, but also at adult age, it's still very important to have a healthy microbiome. Because a healthy microbiome can do quite a lot of good for you. I told you that all these bacteria are small chemical factories, and what we think is a healthy microbiome is a microbiome with large diversity, with many different bacteria, many different chemical factories that can digest whatever you are planning to eat. Also even raw vegetables, which are really difficult to digest. And it was recently published in Science that with a healthy microbiome, people can even digest grass. What a microbiome also does for you is it provides an inner lining of your gut. Now you have to think of the gut wall as being extremely thin, because nutrients should be able to pass, things like glucose or fatty acids, they should be able to pass the gut wall. So your skin has several layers of cells. Even your lips have multiple layers of cells. But your gut wall is so thin, it really is a fleece. It consists of only one layer of cells. And what a healthy microbiome does is that it makes a kind of biofilm at the inner side that protects this very thin gut wall and provides an extra barrier to keep pathogens out of the bloodstream and out of your body. So it's really protective. It also trains the immune system. Like the brain, also the immune system is very immature at birth. And it really needs to learn what is friend and what is foe. And the immune cells, you know, the white blood cells, they're typically trained in the gut, because the gut is where the outer world comes inside, through nutrients, through all the microorganisms that live there. And some 80% of white blood cells at any moment are at school in the gut, being trained there. Now, the more diverse your nutrition and the more diverse your microbiome, the better the immune system will be trained and the lower the risk for allergies and autoimmune disorders. The gut microbiome does something more. If you feed it well, but only if you feed it well, it will produce these very nice substances that are called short-chain fatty acids. most famous of them being butyrate. Very smelly. If it, well, you know the order, I guess. Short-chain fatty acids, as their name says, are very short. That short that they can pass the one cellular gut wall and enter the bloodstream. And through the blood, they arrive at all the organs, including the brain, and have beneficial effects there. We think that they may even counteract the aging process. So this is something you really want your gut to do. But if you wanted to produce short-chain fatty acids for you, you need to make your microbiome dance. If you want to make them dance, you need to feed them. You need to feed them well. And what they really like to eat is nutritional fibers. There's lots of nutritional fibers in fruits. For example, bananas have inulin, apples have pectin, onions, very rich source of fibers, and all types of vegetables. And especially, I told you that we would like to have a diverse microbiome, and all bacteria have its own special favorite food. So you have to eat many different types of vegetables and fruit to make all your gut bacteria swing. Multigrain bread, but also multigrain pasta, multigrain rice, multigrain whatever. This is the diet that makes your gut happy. And if you eat that, your gut microbiome will make you happy. This means you need to cook yourself or have someone really nice cook for you. Taking care of your gut microbiome also means not to eat several substances, especially ready-made meals. Ready-made meals need to be preserved for several days, and what's typically added to make them fresh for a longer time is preservatives. Now, preservatives prevent bacteria from multiplying in the food. You are going to digest that food, rather not, but perhaps you do. And in that case, these preservatives are going to keep your gut bacteria from multiplying. While with your feces, you lose about 1/3 of your gut bacteria every day or maybe every other day. So they have to multiply. And if you prevent them from multiplying, they will die out. We know that ready-made meals, high consumption of ready-made meals, especially when they contain meat, is an important risk factor for cardiovascular diseases. We knew that, right? For diabetes, we knew that. But also, and just as significant, for mental health disorders, especially depression and anxiety disorders. They have a very high association with consumption of ready-made meals. Another no-go, alcohol. I know you're all drinking mocktails now, but actually this event, if named in Dutch, it should have been called Wetenschap en Karnemelk. Alcohol, we use it in the hospital to clean the skin before we give infection because it's bactericide. That's exactly what it will do. If you drink large quantities of alcohol, it will kill your bacteria. That's what alcohol does, right? That's why we use it for. So maybe have a nice mocktail with me afterwards. Even though maybe water kefir or kombucha would be preferable. Now, I've been focusing a lot about the lactic acid bacteria, and this is a specific type of bacteria that we've been using a lot to prepare food. For example, we prepare it to to make sauerkraut or kimchi, make yogurt, kefir, or cheese. There are many other dishes for which we ferment our food, and we typically use these lactic acid bacteria. So if you consume these types of food, they're full of lactic acid bacteria if you don't cook them. So these foods will actually enrich your microbiome. Now, I told you that high consumption of ready-made food increases the risk for mental health problems. And why is that connection? So how does a healthy microbiome or unhealthy microbiome reach to the brain? Well, the brain uses what we call neurotransmitters. You know them, right? Like serotonin, dopamine, these guys. And they usually are made out of amino acids. And amino acids are the components of proteins. And proteins are in your food, right? So you eat proteins. For example, you eat chili sin carne, because we're not eating meat, of course. And then you will digest the proteins into amino acids. And that's where your gut microbiome comes in. You have a specific bacteria that can convert tryptophan, an amino acid, into serotonin. Serotonin is an important neurotransmitter for mood, but also for the nervous system of your gut. So it's also for bowel movement, a very important neurotransmitter. Another bacterium can transform the amino acid glutamate into GABA. Now, glutamate is a neurotransmitter in itself. It's an excitatory neurotransmitter, while GABA, the product of a bacterial digestion, is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. Lots of GABA makes you nice and zen, calm and sleepy, and if it's too high, you'll just fall asleep. When people are treated with high dose of broad-spectrum antibiotics, and sometimes that happens in the hospital, you know, if people have sepsis or other severe illnesses, lots of the bacteria that convert glutamate into GABA will die out. And all of a sudden, concentrations of glutamate will rise, while those of GABA will be very low, and that can really lead to agitation, what we also see in the hospital, and sometimes even mania or psychosis. That's what we call antibiomania. It's rare, but it exists. Also, abdominal bacteria make the precursor of dopamine, very important neurotransmitter for movement, for learning, for the reward system. So if you don't have enough of these bacteria, you will have lower activity of dopamine. There's yet another route that connects the microorganisms in your gut to mental health. And that pathway has to do with stress, and especially with stress resilience. Now, like it or not, we all encounter stress in our lives. I don't think it's possible to have a stress-free career. Some of us encounter lots of stress, others less so, but it will find us every now and then. And then it comes to you being stress resilient or not. Because we see quite high prevalence, especially of anxiety disorders and depression in current Dutch population, and it's still rising, which has a lot to do with stress. If your brain perceives stress, it triggers the production of cortisol. Cortisol is our stress hormone. And cortisol acts on the immune system. And you remember where these were. Most of them were in the gut. And in the gut, there's a specific type of immune cells called the gamma delta T cells. And this cell is responsive to cortisol. High stress, high cortisol, the gamma delta T cell will start to multiply. First in your gut, more and more and more, and then it will swarm out through the blood to all the organs, including close to the brain. What these multiplied gamma delta T cells do to the brain, they produce pro-inflammatory proteins. These are cytokines that can have an effect on your mood. Maybe you remember an instance when you had maybe the flu, maybe corona, you were really nasty ill and you really couldn't enjoy your nice warm bed, not even binge watching on the couch, because such an inflammatory state, and this is especially caused by these pro-inflammatory proteins, can make you feel nasty. They can make you feel apathic. You don't feel like doing anything. Anhedonic, you cannot enjoy things that you usually love. And also asocial, you want to be alone, you don't want to see anybody. And these are important precursors of burnout, depression, and anxiety. So, in some instances, high stress leads to high cortisol, leads to gamma delta T cell activation, leading to high pro-inflammatory proteins, leading to what we call anhedonia, apathic mood. But specific type of lactoacidic bacteria can actually prevent these gamma delta T cells from multiplication. And we see that in rodent experiments, that with large quantities of this specific strain, these T cells will just remain in the gut and will not multiply that much. There will still be stress, you will still experience stress, but you will not become anhedonic, apathic, asocial. And it is an important protection for depression and burnout. This has been tested twice in humans, both times in Japan. And these studies both included medical students. And in Japan, I think it's similar here in the Netherlands, medical students have to take a period of several weeks of examinations. And these are quite stressful periods. The students work as hard as they can. They learn many hours a day and really have to give it their best shot. Now, half of these medical students was treated with a beverage containing lactoacidic bacteria. The other half used placebo, so a beverage without anything special in it. And after the examination period, the students who used the bacterial beverages had experienced fewer stress-related symptoms. For example, they had fewer abdominal complaints and they had fewer sleeping problems. The study doesn't tell if they also did their examinations better. I'd love to know that. And they replicated that study in a different town with the same findings. Now, this is Japan. And don't think that you can just translate it to the Netherlands, because the Japanese food is quite a lot healthier than ours. And I think that if you just put in bacterial beverages and add bacteria and add bacteria and add bacteria, but you don't feed them, and you just keep on eating ready-made food and drinking cocktails, I don't think it's going to work that well. So my idea is that in stressful periods, you have to take really good care of your gut microbiome by feeding them a lot of nutritional fibers, and then they will take really good care of you and guide you through your examination period. Thank you so much. Nice and sugary drink. Smoky. Cheers. It's a nice one. So, for many thousands of years, humans and lactic acid bacteria went along so well. And Genghis Khan already had sauerkraut in his saddlebag to have some vitamin C on his long travel to Rome and beyond. And it seems that Attila the Hun was already fermenting yogurt. They had to, because vegetables, milk products, also meat, they will be fresh for a very short time if you don't do anything to them. But if you ferment them with bacteria, they will become containable for weeks or even months. So for many thousands of years, this is what we did practically to all our foods to preserve it. And actually, my mom, who's turning 80 this year, she told me that when she was young, in their basement, they had these large pots, one with fermented coal and the other with fermented beans. And that's something that they just made in October and that they ate all through the winter. So imagine how many lactic acid bacteria people used to eat by just using fermented food at the daily basis. But I think our long-time relationship with the lactic acid bacteria is not going all that well. And I think we're in a relational crisis at the moment. We've been using pesticides, agricultural poison over the last 80 years. And unfortunately, the EU just decided that we can just go on to use glyphosate for another 5 years. Well, a colleague of mine in the UMCG showed that glyphosate clearly kills all the bacteria that live in your gut. So we may be tolerant, but our bacteria certainly are not. And we're not just spraying our vegetables and our fruit, but we're also spraying the soil, and it will be in the water. It will infest our whole ecosystem. We have antibiotics. And antibiotics have saved many lives. And I must say that Dutch physicians are really modest in prescribing antibiotics. If you compare that to other countries within and outside Europe, we do not prescribe a lot. So I'm not telling you don't take your doctor's prescription. I think if a Dutch doctor prescribes it, there's a good chance that you'd better take it. But they do have side effects, and they do affect your gut microbiome, quite severely so. Where the doctors are not that modest with antibiotics is in agriculture and the cattle that we breed under horrific circumstances that can only promote infection. They do need large quantities of antibiotics to keep them only alive until they can be slaughtered. And that not only infects the meats, but these antibiotics, through their stools, are also on the soil, and our soil will also have the antibiotics where they kill the bacteria in our soil and in our drinking water. Finally, the refrigerator. It looks quite innocent, doesn't it? But actually, this is the reason that we don't ferment our food that much anymore. How often do you eat sauerkraut or kimchi?
Every day.
Good. Well done. But most of us just keep our vegetables either in the freezer or in the refrigerator and have fresh food throughout the winter time. We see that the microbiome has become less and less in Western society, especially in Western nutrition. But I think we've had the worst already. When I went through Amsterdam, I hardly saw any Febo. I used to live here and we had it everywhere. But what I saw instead was Pokeball. sushi, juice bars. So perhaps we've had the worst of our fast food epidemiology, and maybe we're turning towards a better relationship with our gut microbiome. I have a sip of my cocktail. And then I'd like to talk you through some examples of the connection between mental and brain diseases and their gut microbiome. And let us start with depression. In the Netherlands, 1 in 5 has a depression somewhere in life. That's a lot. And people with depression often also have abdominal complaints. And the other way around is also true. People that have abdominal disorders also frequently have depression and anxiety. Now, this co-occurrence is no coincidence because serotonin is the neurotransmitter that's active in the brain and involved in mood, but also in the gut and involved in bowel movement. What I think is a fascinating experiment is where there was a poop transplantation from patients suffering from depression to sterile mice. So sterile mice received the poo from depressive patients, and they developed depression-like traits. These were not talking mice, so I don't know exactly, but they looked quite depressed, and they didn't feel like having many treats. We also know that the gut microbiome of patients suffering from depression is a little bit deviant. Subtly so, but there are differences. And until now, there have been some 25 studies that provided probiotics. Now, a probiotic is a mixture usually of healthy bacteria, usually containing lactic acid bacteria. Not all these 25 studies found efficacy for depression, but if you take the great lot together, what we call a meta-analysis, then there was a modest but significant effect. Now again, I'm not telling you to use just probiotics. That would be very simple, right? Just use these probiotic beverages and that's it. But I think we really have to develop nutritional habits that are healthy for our gut microbiome, healthy for ourselves, healthy for our cattle, and healthy for the planet. Let's look at another illness, Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's incidence is also growing. Where I come from, Groningen, there's many people with Parkinson's disease. I work in a very large Parkinson center. It's actually less here in Amsterdam. And it's especially the rural areas that have the highest prevalence of Parkinson's disease. And that has everything to do with the agricultural poisons we use. It's especially the men and especially the farmers that are most affected by Parkinson's disease. So for me, it's very curious that they are asking our government to continue using these pesticides because they have a huge risk on Parkinson's. So I don't know. And we see that Parkinson's often starts in the gut. So we typically know these neurological signs like tremor and stiff movement, but actually constipation is very often the first sign of Parkinson's disease. And we see that the nervous system of the gut is often affected earlier than the brain itself. And then the pathogen of Parkinson's disease, it actually climbs the vagal nerve, which connects our gut to our brain, and then enters the brain. And we see the first Parkinson pathology starting very close to the nucleus of the vagal nerve. So it really uses it as a stairways. We also know that people with an adequate microbiome that have these nice microfilms at their gut interior are better protected for Parkinson's disease. And currently in UMC Groningen, we're using a diet, a healthy diet, to see if that can improve Parkinson's disease. Alzheimer's disorder. It still is the most common brain disorder. More frequent in elderly, but not only affecting elderly. And we know a bit about the pathology of Alzheimer's disease. If we look at the brain, there are specific plaques, these Alzheimer plaques, and they consist of a protein that's called beta amyloid. Beta amyloid is produced by brain cells, but it's not an anomaly that brain cells produce beta amyloid. They actually produce it for a reason. It is their first line defense against bacteria entering the brain. For example, salmonella can often enter the brain if you have salmonella in the blood, and then as a reaction, the brain produces beta amyloid, which is toxic for these bacteria. So it's effective against bacteria, but it's also toxic for the brain itself. And that's what's causing dementia. And for a long time, we know that a gum infection is a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. And I always thought as a student, well, sure, these people are already a little bit forgetful. So the first thing they forget, of course, is to brush their teeth. And the gum infection would only be logical. So I was not impressed at all by this connection between gum infection and Alzheimer's disease. But actually, I should have been impressed, because later studies showed that after patients had died, these same bacteria could be found in their brains. So obviously, the bacteria that caused the gum infection can somehow enter the blood, and I think it will be in the gut, because the gut wall is so thin, and then somehow reach the brain and trigger the beta amyloid response. So I don't want to tell you that bacteria entering the brain is the only reason for Alzheimer. Surely it is not, but it can be a triggering factor. And the healthy microbiome and the healthy oral cavity can protect you from dementia. So I'm telling you not only to stop alcohol, stop meat, eat lots of different vegetables, but also to brush your teeth. It's like your mom, isn't it? That's a bit too much. Sorry. Let's look at aging. I don't know what you think. I'm a bit older than you. Do you think aging should be called a disorder as well? There's actually debate about that in medicine. Some do, some think it is. We know a little bit about aging. And one of the aspects of aging is that your... Oh, what's happening? Sorry, I'm pressing the wrong buttons. Is that your immune system ages. And your immune system at old age is not as good as it used to be. And you saw that during pandemics, right? Then older people were really more susceptible to die from corona infection. That has to do with the specific response against particular pathogens that is lower at higher age. But to compensate for that, the immune system starts to produce larger quantities of these pro-inflammatory proteins. You've heard that already. And that is actually not good for your organs. That will damage your organs, including the brain, and that could be an important factor in aging. Now, not only your immune system, but also your microbiome ages. While it's not yet great at early age, it's also not great at older age. And at old age, the microbiome becomes less diverse. And especially these lactic acid bacteria become less with aging. Now, that could be a result from inflammation, but it could actually also be the other way around. Researchers that study aging are really fond on killifish, that are these really small tropical fish. And the poor thing, they only live a couple of weeks, which is very good for impatient researchers because you can study aging just within a few weeks' time. Experiments that they've done is they have done a poop transplantation from young killifish to old killifish. What they saw there is actually a prolongation of life. These killifish grew older and their inflammation was less rapid. The other way around also worked. If you gave the older microbiome to the younger killifish, they aged more rapidly. They had earlier inflammation and died early. So Hollywood may want to make you think that drinking young virgins' blood will help you to reverse aging. No, 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 no. What you need to do is eat young virgins' poo. What we see in the elderly is that in those that are still very vital at high age and that are still have very flexible minds, and I'm sure there's some of those here in the public, isn't there? I'll find you afterwards. They still have a very diverse microbiome, and they still have lots of bifido and lactic acid bacteria in their microbiome. Now, we do poo transplantations not only with killifish, but they are done also in the Netherlands with human donors. And in Leiden, we have a large biobank specialized in poo from healthy, usually young donors. And the only indication currently present in regular medicine is to give it for a severe infection with Clostridium difficile. And that's a very common bacterial infection that you often see in hospital settings. And these are usually very old, fragile people that will have a poo transfer from these healthy, probably young donors. So I think that would be the ideal situation to see if there's any reversal of aging there. I haven't heard it. Sun setting. I've come to the end of my story and to the end of life, because all men must die, Valar Morghulis in High Valyrian. And then our gut microbiome provides us with our last dignity and provides us the service of digesting us in whole and turn us into fertile soil. A good beginning for new life. That's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much for your attention.